On February 13th, 2017, a middle-aged man hastily made his way through Kuala Lumpur airport to make it on time for his flight. Suddenly, a woman approaches him from behind, covering his eyes as though she were a romantic love interest asking him to guess who. However, it quickly becomes clear that there is nothing cute or fun about this embrace when he begins to react, struggling to wrench himself free. The man then seems to escape her grasp as the woman slips away into the crowd. She can then be seen here walking away calm and confident in a sweater emblazoned with the letters LOL before staring right into the camera as if to say, "Yeah, I just did that." But what did she do? Well, according to the victim himself, who immediately went to report this incident to security, the woman had slathered his face in a strange, oily substance. But she wasn't the only one. It may be hard to see from the security footage, but there was actually a second woman, pointed out here by the yellow arrow, who also put her oily hands on his face, but from the front at the same time as the first woman before running away in the opposite direction. From first glance, it appeared to have been some sort of weird but ultimately harmless prank. But the man knew better. His face was already burning. A security officer and an airport employee, more confused than concerned, escorted him to a medical clinic. However, shortly after entering the clinic, the man's legs, which had been gradually losing strength, finally gave out. He collapses and suffers a seizure. Medical staff rush to his side. They load him onto a stretcher and rush him to an ambulance. They speed off to the nearest hospital to get him the help, but it was too late. The man died in the ambulance just 20 minutes after he had been attacked. But who were the two women who had attacked him, and what had killed him so quickly? Well, after examining the dead man's body, doctors found that his face was covered in a rare substance known as VX, a powerful nerve agent. It is odorless, colorless, and similar to motor oil in consistency. When absorbed into the body through the eyes, mouth, or even the thin skin of the face, VX functions as an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor. Normally, as you try to move your body, your motor neurons release the enzyme acetylcholine, which tells our muscles to move or contract. However, VX prevents acetylcholinesterase from acting, which results in the receptors of this enzyme to become fatigued. This eventually leads to violent contractions between the muscle groups. As this blockade continues, the muscles begin to suffer from total paralysis. It is this paralysis that causes the diaphragm to clam up, ultimately leading to death by asphyxiation. Previously to being smeared on the face of the man at the airport, VX was reported to have been wielded by Cubans during the Angolan Civil War, Saddam Hussein during the Halabja chemical attack, and Doomsday cult member Masami Sukiya to kill 12 people in a subway attack. As part of the Chemical Weapons Convention of 1993, every country in the world, except 3, signed an agreement to halt production and destroy any stockpiles of VX and all other chemical weapons. So, as you can imagine, the fact that 2 women had used VX to kill a man in a crowded public space was very strange. But there is also another form of the chemical weapon called VX2 that can be made by mixing together QL, known as isopropylaminoethylmethylphosphonate, together with sulfur or a liquid dimethyl polysulfide mixture, which on their own are harmless. This is crucial to our case because each woman could have carried one component of the VX2, which would explain why 2 of them were needed to complete this brazen attack. After the first woman smeared on one of the components, the other woman would synthesize the nerve agent directly on the man's face by adding the other component. This would be certain death for the man, but would allow neither of the women to suffer any of the serious effects. Now, it is entirely possible that the second woman to apply their part of the mixture would get some synthesized VX2 on their hands, however, only enough to make them ill if not washed off immediately, which is exactly what the 2 women did, immediately rushing to separate washrooms before fleeing the scene. Meanwhile, emergency personnel went back through the belongings of the unidentified man who had suddenly died. Guards find that his backpack is filled with $100,000 in cash, 12 strange vials of liquid, as well as 4 North Korean passports all bearing the name Kim Chol. The ridiculous amount of money was one thing, but the 4 identical passports were another. They scratched their heads, slightly clueless. Nevertheless, the Malaysian authorities now had what they assumed was his real name, the murder weapon, and now they had to find his killers. This, funny enough, would be the easiest part of the investigation. The first woman was identified through CCTV footage as Duan Thi Hung from Vietnam, and found with comical ease, helped largely by the distinct LOL sweatshirt that she wore again when she returned to the scene of the crime 2 days after the killing. The second woman was slightly slightly harder to track down, but not by much. CCTV footage also helped authorities positively identify her as Siti Aisyah of Indonesia, and a day later, she was arrested at a hotel nearby. Siti and Dwan, who at this point investigators assumed must be trained assassins due to their coordinated use of VX, were now in custody and would soon be facing the only punishment given to murderers in Malaysia, the death penalty. It seemed that the case was clear-cut and closed, especially with the damning CCTV evidence. However, under separate interrogation, both women claimed to have no idea what was going on. While they admitted to spreading an oily substance on the man's face, Siti and Dwan each insisted that they had no clue who he was or that he had even died. In fact, according to them, the whole thing was just a harmless prank, a stunt for a video to be uploaded onto YouTube. The investigators couldn't believe what they were hearing, and how could they? These two women had killed a man in broad daylight with an internationally banned chemical weapon, and now they were saying it was just a prank? It was insane, but as it turned out, the women had an equally insane story to go along with it. Siti Aisyah was born and raised in Rangkasumar, Serang, Indonesia. It was a relatively peaceful life. Her parents were farmers and the community was close and tight-knit. Siti was a bright child, but she had to stop studying as soon as she finished 6th grade. She had no choice. There were no secondary schools in the area. Instead, she began to help her father sell wares at the local market. The days were long and hard. As she looked out into the distance with her father's bag on her back, she imagined living in a bustling urban jungle. The nearby capital city of Jakarta called out to her, where she dreamed that she could one day live a glamorous life. And at the age of 14, Siti left home to pursue her dream. She found employment at a sweatshop in Jakarta, earning a mere $50 a month sewing clothes and sweeping the floors of the factory. Here, she soon began to develop a relationship with a man named Gunawan, the business owner's son. The frequent interactions around the factory eventually bore fruit. The pair fell in love, and just 2 years later, at the age of 16, she married Gunawan and welcomed their own son, Rio, into the world. As the sweatshop came upon hard times, they decided to move to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia for better financial prospects. It wasn't Jakarta, but Siti had found a life better than being trapped in a sweatshop all day. After all, she found a loving husband and birthed an adorable little boy. She found work overseeing a small store, while her husband worked as a waiter at a restaurant. But then, the couple began to fight, and eventually came to the mutual decision to divorce, citing in a handwritten letter that they had irreconcilable differences. There was no longer harmony between them. The two went their separate ways. Gunawan returned to their native Indonesia with their son Rio, while Siti remained in Kuala Lumpur, finding work as a masseuse, or at least that's how her line of work was referred to on paper. Just like that, she had lost her husband, her son, and any hope of making her dreams a reality. But then, one early morning, Siti was approached by John, a cab driver she was on friendly terms with. He told her about a man who had approached him about finding some women to act in prank videos. It wouldn't be hard, he explained. All it would entail was doing embarrassing things to random strangers in public. But what really captured Siti's imagination was how much she'd be paid, as much as $100 per video. At the time, she'd only earned $15 each day, and even with all her extra freelancing on the side, she needed more money if she wanted to live in comfort and stability while also sending enough home to her mother and son. Though she was hundreds of miles away, she still cared deeply for her family. She wanted to build a home in her native village, where she and her mother could live. Siti agreed to meet John's contact. He brought her to the fashionable Pavilion Mall, where luxury brands like Dior and Hermes were sold. Here, she met a man named James, who introduced himself as a Japanese national. Perhaps cautious and wary of the circumstances of her meeting, Siti introduced herself as Nidia, an alias she often used with clients to keep herself safe. Unfortunately, there was a rather big language barrier. James, it appeared, could not speak Bahasa Indonesia. They struggled to communicate, but with the help of choppy English and Google Translate, James eventually managed to communicate that he was creating a hidden camera prank show on YouTube. Siti was then directed to smear some baby oil on an unsuspecting Vietnamese woman while James recorded the whole thing. For her involvement, Siti was paid $100 up front. Siti performed multiple similar stunts at other malls, as well as hotels over the next month, with compensation ranging from $100 to $200 per prank. One day, James invited Siti to perform a prank video at the Kuala Lumpur airport. Siti was happy to accept. She had earned more money in this short amount of time than she had ever seen in her entire life. Besides, she always wanted to be an actress, and it seemed like this might be the break that she needed to finally make her dreams come true. Similar to City, before being arrested for assassinating a man in an airport, Duan Thi Huang had a simple life, growing up in a small one-story brick house just outside a rice paddy in the rural village of Nha Binh, Vietnam. Her father was a war veteran who used that past experience in his work as a security guard, but her mother died when she was young, and her father eventually remarried. Later on, Duan's father remarked that his daughter was rather distant, and that she had been much closer to her late mother. Perhaps it was this emotional distance that prompted Duan to leave her home at just 18 years old. Duan traveled to Hanoi, the bustling capital of Vietnam. Here, she began attending a pharmaceutical college. To earn some money on the side to help pay her way through college, she began working in certain entertainment districts, though she never went into the details when describing her work to her father. She worked at popular nightclubs and bars, which attracted people from all over the city and, indeed, sometimes the world. She was popular with customers, and her former boss boasted that she was an exemplary employee. The long nights of entertaining clients amidst blinding strobe lights and alcohol-fueled events was what her life became. But Duan longed for the spotlight. She wanted to be famous, to match the new life she was building for herself in Hanoi. First, the opportunity presented itself in the form of Vietnam Idol. She snagged a spot in an audition and sang her heart out for a panel of judges. Although her audition was not a success and her appearance on the talent show lasted for a whole 20 seconds, apparently her low neckline and good looks were deemed noteworthy enough by the public to make her famous on Vietnamese social media for a short period of time. Still, to her, this was a bold step toward her dreams, and Duan was eager to keep trying to make it big. Eventually, the owner of a bar she worked at introduced Duan to a Korean man known only as Mr. Y. He invited Duan to work as an actress for a series of funny videos, which, to Duan, seemed almost too good to be true. Here was another chance to make it big. It wouldn't exactly earn her a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but it was definitely a start. The aspiring actress within her was enthralled. Duan agreed to meet Mr. Y, where she boldly asked for a salary of $1,000 a month. She then participated in a series of prank videos for Mr. Y, the first of which had her kiss a stranger outside the Hanoi Opera House. In another instance, Duan was instructed to touch the eyes of a man from behind. In yet another, she was told to smear cream on another person's face. These were rather strange requests, but fairly harmless. Duan likely thought that this was nothing more than the eccentricities necessary to make it more viral. More importantly, she was bringing in more money than she'd ever known. Then, one afternoon, Mr. Y told Duan that she would be taking the act international and star in a prank video with another woman, a collaboration of sorts, at an airport in Kuala Lumpur. Thinking nothing of it, Duan went to pack her bags. On February 13th, Duan and City stalked their unsuspecting victim in the busy entrance of Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Their target was a pudgy, middle-aged man. It would be an embarrassing few moments for him, but it mattered little, especially with how much money was on the line. The two girls didn't know each other, but it appeared to them that their bosses did. Their prank was the same as the dozens of pranks they've done before: apply a liquid on a man's face and disappear as he stands there like an idiot. The cameras and video editors would do the rest of the work. Duan and City thought nothing much more of it. Their target was on the move, and when they saw their chance, they sprung into action, executing their prank in a matter of seconds. City slid out from behind the pillar and wiped liquid on his face. Duan was next, applying a similar liquid over his eyes and mouth. Mission complete. The two women sprint in opposite directions, leaving their victim confounded and confused. As they run to separate bathrooms to wash their oily hands, the liquid on the hysteric man's face begins to do something no baby oil or lotion is capable of. It begins to kill him. Unbeknownst to them, all of their previous pranks had been played on actors, and their bosses, Mr. Y and James, had never intended on making them YouTube stars. They were spies, covertly sculpting these women into unconsenting assassins. And now, months of preparation had culminated in a murder of a man in Malaysia, where such a crime carries with it only one possible sentence: the death penalty. If these two women couldn't prove in court that they were telling the truth, they would face the gallows. Meanwhile, their crime was making headlines, and not just in Malaysia, but around the world. You see, it wasn't just that they had killed a man, it was who they killed. Malaysian authorities had positively identified the man who died in the airport, and his name wasn't Kim Chol, like what was printed on his 5 passports. He was Kim Jong-nam, the brother of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. City and Duan had now found themselves embroiled within what was possibly the biggest political incident of the 2010s. They were going to need a great legal team, like my friends over at Morgan & Morgan, this video's sponsor. If you're ever seriously hurt, your injury could be worth millions. A Morgan & Morgan case in Florida ended in a settlement of $12 million, which is 34 times the highest insurance offer. And in Philadelphia, another case went home with 40 times the highest insurance offer at $26 million. And that was only within the last couple of months for victims involved in life-altering car crashes. They don't settle for lowball offers. Instead, if you become their client, they will fight to get you what you deserve. And you don't even have to pay them unless you win. So if you ever get seriously injured, your case could be worth millions, and you're only a few clicks away from potentially changing your life. It's so easy. You can start your claim now with Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/brew, found in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen from your phone's camera. And thank you, Morgan & Morgan, for sponsoring today's video. Meanwhile, City and Dwan had just learned that the true identity of the man they had unknowingly killed was the son of North Korea's former supreme leader. But why Kim Jong-nam? Who wanted him dead? Well, it all has to do with who his mother was. Kim Jong-nam was born on May 10, 1971, in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang. His mother, Song-hee-rim, was one of the 4 mistresses of the then dictator Kim Jong-il. His father wanted to keep him hidden away, as his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, disapproved of his mother. Thus, it was decided that Jong-nam would be sent to live with his mother's sister, Song-hee-rang, who would homeschool him far away from the prying eyes of the public. Thus, he grew up isolated from the outside world, only allowed to travel if his father permitted it. It felt like they were trapped, Hye-rang recalled. Once, when Jong-nam was 4, he fell terribly ill, which required him to be admitted to the hospital. However, it just so happened that Jong-il's stepmother and half-brother were touring the very hospital Jong-nam was staying at. When Hee-rang's mother realized this, she picked up the young and sick Jong-nam, bundled him up, and crawled out the window to remain unseen. Meanwhile, Jong-il's family passed by, none the wiser. These secretive living conditions were all Jong-nam knew growing up. Eventually, his father recognized that Jong-nam was suffering something quite close to cabin fever, as the only places he was ever allowed to be were their safe houses in Pyongyang and Cheongseong-dong, so he began to relax the restrictions somewhat and allowed Jong-nam to visit their other homes in Geneva and Moscow. Jong-nam was thus able to see the world beyond the clouded lens of his father's regime. Jong-nam inherited the same interests as his father, such as movies and filmmaking. It appeared that Jong-il approved of this, as he had a miniature film studio built for his son to use. There was some form of loving father and son bond. As Jong-nam grew up, his father began to look upon him more favorably. Jong-il appointed his son to the Ministry of Public Security, and later on as the head of the North Korean Computer Committee. These increased responsibilities made it appear as though Jong-il was grooming him to be his next successor, and many of the late dictator's inner circle thought so too. But then, a trip to Disneyland changed everything. In May 2001, Jong-nam arrived at the Narita International Airport in Japan with 2 women and a young boy who was reportedly his son. They were there on vacation. Jong-nam loved Japan, evidenced by the several secret trips he had taken there in just the past year. In this instance, he was on a trip to Tokyo Disneyland, as future dictators tend to do. However, he was there on a false passport, traveling under the alias Pang Sheng, using a fake Dominican Republic passport. He was promptly arrested by security, and the entire incident became a major embarrassment for Kim Jong-il. He was furious. Not only was his son arrested for fake credentials, he was arrested on his way to the House of Mouse. Jong-nam's reputation plummeted, but not solely because of this incident. He had long been a rather reserved critic of his father's regime, occasionally speaking out and decrying his autocratic tendencies. Because of his earlier trips and education in Switzerland, Jong-nam's eyes were opened. The Tokyo incident likely only accelerated Jong-nam's fall from grace. The most damning evidence of his estrangement was during Kim Jong-il's funeral in 2011. Jong-nam was notably absent during the proceedings. As the eldest son, he was widely expected to make an appearance, regardless of how distant he had grown from the regime. It thus came as no surprise when Jong-nam's half-brother, Kim Jong-un, ascended to power instead. Almost immediately upon replacing his deceased father, Kim Jong-un ordered his half-brother assassinated. He and the other higher echelons of the North Korean regime saw his existence as one that should be removed sooner or later, the same way Jong-un eliminated other dissidents. Jong-nam was apparently aware of the target on his back, and made every effort to try and dissuade his brother from having him assassinated. In one letter, Jong-nam wrote, "Please withdraw the order to punish me and my family. We have nowhere to hide." But Jong-un would not be dissuaded, and Jongnam's fears would eventually be realized on that fateful day at the Kuala Lumpur airport. Planning the assassination itself was clearly made from the top. Jongnam was aware that he was being targeted, so he would have been much more wary of strangers, especially North Koreans. Kim Dong-sik, a defector and former North Korean spy, pointed out that the choice of two women from different countries was deliberate. Jongnam would be far more disarmed if he were approached by non-Koreans, and even more so if they appeared to be harmless. But what was Jongnam doing in Kuala Lumpur? He was coming back from a visit to Langkawi, a popular duty-free tourist destination. His next flight was to Macau, where he was known to have lived. Another reason for intrigue is the amount of money he had in his bag at the time of his murder. Earlier, Malaysian authorities discovered his 4 fake passports and about $100,000 in cash. What was he doing with that much to begin with? One can look at his possible ties to the USA's CIA. Though many of the details are obscure and unclear, there was indeed a link between them and Jongnam. He was most likely an informant, though the exact level of involvement is uncertain. His trip to Malaysia was possibly to meet with one of his handlers. The money was thus possibly payment for the information that he provided them. But perhaps the most puzzling discovery from Jongnam's bag wasn't his 4 passports or the life-changing amount of money he was carrying. It was an antidote for the VX nerve agent. It's another piece of evidence that he knew he was being targeted, but why hadn't he used it? One first has to remember that Jongnam died in a matter of minutes, as the deadly poison was applied through his cheek. Tests have shown that this is the most lethal place for it to be. One would need 25 times more of the same amount for it to work on the hands, for instance. Jongnam carried 12 doses of atropine, typically used to slow patient heart rates, treat pesticide poisoning, and, in this instance, as a counter to the effects of nerve agents. When taken in its pill or liquid form, as Jongnam possessed, it would take up to 20 minutes for it to take effect. But by then, the VX nerve agent would already have done its damage. It is meant to buy time for the victim by staving off the effects of the nerve agent, and immediate medical attention is still required. Kim Jongnam's life was a whirlwind, and his death sent shockwaves throughout the world, and there would be blood to pay. Malaysia was an outlier. At that time in 2017, it was one of 30 countries that maintained an embassy in Pyongyang. Their relationship was so close, in fact, that North Korea allowed Malaysians to enter their country without a visa. They were the only country to enjoy this distinction. The two thus enjoyed strong trade relations, and many North Koreans traveled to Malaysia to study and work. The economic advantages that North Korea reaped were so great that they even began operating an illegal firearms ring right in the country itself. Thus, the fallout was immense. Not only was the murder conducted on Malaysian soil, but North Korea claimed that Kim Jong-nam had actually died of a heart attack, rejecting the notion that they were involved in any way. What followed was a back-and-forth tit-for-tat between the two countries. On March 6th, Malaysia canceled all visa-free entries for all North Koreans. They also forced Kang Chol, the North Korean ambassador to Malaysia, to leave the country. North Korea then enacted a similar policy for the Malaysian ambassadors residing within their country, and took it a step further by banning Malaysians from leaving their country, and then Malaysia banned the North Koreans residing in theirs from doing the same. The biggest consequence of this whole incident, however, had yet to come. Siti and Duan were about to face justice, whatever form that may be. On October 2nd, 2017, 8 months after Jongnam lost his life at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, Siti and Duan faced the trial of their lives. A host of escort guards tightly gripped their slender arms as they escorted them inside the High Court in Shah Alam Selangor. Equipped with bulletproof vests, their heads hung low, avoiding the glare of flashing cameras and inquisitive reporters hoping to get a soundbite for their articles. If they were found guilty, they would receive the death penalty, and this was day one of a long series of court appearances to decide their fate. At the preliminary hearing, both Siti and Duan entered a plea of not guilty, professing their innocence and repeating what they had told the police several times before, that they did not know that they were killing a man. They were just filming a YouTube prank video, nothing more. But the prosecution was there to convince the court that the two women were lying. They pointed out that the attack appeared highly coordinated and well orchestrated, and that each woman immediately went to washrooms to clean their hands. They thus found it extremely improbable that two women were unknowingly handling such a dangerous toxin. In return, the women's defense lawyers presented CCTV footage, which showed 4 North Korean men, Hong Song-hak, Ri Ji-hyun, Ri Jae-nam, and Oh Jong-gil, who seemed to be directing the women and closely observing Jongnam's movements at the airport before fleeing to North Korea upon his death. In a subsequent hearing in January 2018, Dwan's lawyers presented recorded testimony from a woman named Bik Tui, a close friend of Dwan's. She testified and corroborated Dwan's story of how she was recruited by Mr. Y, later identified as Ri Ji-hyun. Ji-hyun was initially aiming to recruit Tui, but at the time, she had a business and family to care for. She instead recommended Dwan, knowing that she was an aspiring actress. The lawyer also pointed out that, in the CCTV footage provided, Dwan could be seen touching her hair shortly after she poisoned Jeongnam. This is hardly the behavior of someone who knew that a deadly toxin was on their hands. City's defense attorney built up a similar defense for his client. The footage also showed City walking into a bathroom to wash her hands, a full 13 minutes after she had assaulted Jeongnam. If she were truly aware that there were toxins on her hand, she wouldn't have waited that long to rid herself of the toxic chemical. He likewise attacked prosecutors for using compromised CCTV footage that seemed to intentionally paint City in a worse light. The footage they provided, for example, did not include snippets of City adjusting her glasses with her hands still contaminated with poison. Furthermore, he also pointed out that City was not wearing gloves, despite how toxic the VX nerve agent was. If there were any guilt at all in her mind, he explains, she would have disposed of her clothes and hopped on the first flight back to Indonesia, rather than staying nearby and even returning to the scene of the crime days later, looking for Mr. Y. Dwan's lawyer would later go on to say, "In our combined 90 years of legal practice, we have not come across a murder case when an accused commits murder in broad daylight in full view of the CCTV cameras, goes back to the scene of crime 2 days later in similar circumstances. The strength of this piece of subsequent conduct evidence buries the prosecution's case," he concluded. In March 2019, something strange happened. The door to City's cell that she had been confined to for the past 2 years opened. Authorities brought her out of their custody and into freedom. As she exited her detention, she waved to the cameras that she was once shied away from, with a smile across her face. However, it was not because of the judge's decision. The Indonesian government sent a letter to the Malaysian government requesting that City be released. To the outrage of Vietnam, this leniency was not shown toward Dwan, who would continue to face trial as regular. When Dwan learned that City was free, she was devastated that a similar mercy was not shown to her. Her condition deteriorated to the point that authorities had to postpone the trial to a later date. Dwan had not slept in 3 days since she found out that City was released. Dwan's lawyers strongly protested what they saw was preferential treatment and discrimination against their client. There was opposition from across the board against the government's refusal to acquit Dwan when City was allowed to walk free. Ramkarpal Singh, a member of parliament, called this decision mind-boggling. Dwan was tried once more. By this point, the stress of the trial had taken its toll. Perhaps to avoid the trial from becoming even lengthier, she pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She had escaped the death penalty, and now it was her turn for an exit, albeit slightly less triumphant than City's. Armed guards escorted Dwan out of the courthouse. A journalist asked Dwan how she was feeling, to which she replied, "I am happy." But thankfully, no more than a month later, Dwan was released early and was on a flight back home to Vietnam. Evans Revere, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, would later remark that the planners, organizers, and overseers of the assassination of Kim Jong-nam have indeed gotten away with it. No one will be held responsible for this horrific attack in which a weapon of mass destruction was used to kill a human being in an international airport. The 4 North Korean suspects, the likely ringleaders behind this whole operation, were safely back in Pyongyang. City and Dwan have returned to their respective home countries with this whole ordeal behind them. They have their whole lives ahead of them, and they still have a chance to fulfill their dreams. But most importantly, they were finally free. If you enjoyed this video, then consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. It's the best thing you can do to help us make more videos, like this one about the search for the 26 kids who vanished without a trace. Click the video on your screen to watch now.